Aloha. Look at this audience. Thank you all for coming. This is fantastic. I think we've used up all of the free chairs in Kīhei tonight. This is great. So my name is Larry Stevens. I'm on the board of the Maui Nui Marine Resource Council. And we are one of the hosts tonight, along with the Nature Conservancy and Maui Ridge to Reef. And we're going to be talking tonight to present the first results from our water quality testing program for Leeward South Maui. We've been doing this for more than a year now, and so we think we've established a good baseline for what the water quality conditions are in the south part of our island. That's an extension of the program that we've been running on the west side of Maui for more than 2 years. And so it took us a little while to get going in South Maui, but we're now up and running and doing great things. And we're so glad to have you all here with us to take note of this information that will hopefully be able to use to guide us in how to remedy some of the things that we've learned throughout this quality testing program. We have a great show for you tonight. We're going to take about 45 minutes to give you a presentation, and then we're going to have some Q&A for a bit, followed by some workshops. We're going to divide you up and talk about what we've learned this evening and what we can do about that information. So hopefully you'll be able to stay through the end. This is a great group of people. As you get a chance to meet people that you don't know, I think you'll be impressed with how knowledgeable and fun they are to work with, and we hope you can all take part in that. This is Alana. She works with the Nature Conservancy and is going to be talking about a lot of good stuff tonight. James Strickland is the manager of our water quality testing program. He works for the Hui. We have Tova Callender, who's the head of Maui Ridge to Reef. And we have Kim Felinski, who is our scientist from the Nature Conservancy, who has helped us get through all of the certification processes and is helping us with data analysis and data understanding and helping us figure out the future of our program. And finally, we have Amy Hodges, who is the the program manager. That was a few years ago. She was the program manager for the Maui Nui Marine Resource Council. Give it up. All right, here we go.
So we are Hui Oka Vaiola, which translates to Association of the Living Waters. We are the first citizen science-based water quality monitoring program of its kind in Hawaii. And so structurally what this looks like, we're 3 organizations who are partners, which include Maui Nui Marine Resource Council, the Nature Conservancy, and West Maui Ridge to Reach Initiative. The feet, legs, and arms of our program are our volunteers, and we have over 40 incredibly talented and dedicated volunteers. Those volunteers are organized by 4 team leaders. We have Kathy up here and several other in the room, so please feel free to chat them up. But they help to organize our volunteers by region and then into smaller groups as they're sampling. We also have a project manager, James, a quality assurance officer, data manager, data analyzer, Kim, and the steering committee. And the 3 partner organizations each have a seat on the steering committee to help make decisions on behalf of Hui Oka Vaiola, how things run now and in the future. Our mission is to deepen the understanding of Maui's coastal water quality through science and advocacy to accelerate positive change. All right, so everything that we're presenting tonight is made possible because of funders. We've applied for grants, we've received donations, and people have actually done what we call Adopt a Beach. For every site that we monitor, it costs about $4,000 a year, and we monitor 39 sites. So thank you to anyone in this room, or anyone who knows anyone in this room, or anyone who's helped in any way for making all of this possible. So why water quality? Why was there a need for Hui Oka Vaiola to come into creation? And why focus on water quality? Simply put, the quality of our water equals the quality of our life. So by monitoring water quality consistently over a long period of time, we can identify those factors that are long-term impacting human health and reefs. And we like to focus on coral reefs because they're a predominant habitat in our nearshore waters. They're really fragile to any really minute changes in water quality parameters. and they're essential to our quality of life, just like water quality. For example, they're the first life mentioned in the Kumulipo, and the Kumulipo is the Hawaiian creation chant. So the first form of life that came into existence was the coral polyp, the ko'a, and from the ko'a, everything else blossomed. So we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the corals. They also help to dissipate up to 97% of wave energy, which is invaluable protection for our nearshore beaches and all of our infrastructure. They generate an astounding $1 million a day through many types of commerce, so very valuable. They feed people and our food chains and are critical habitat for marine life, which support all of these factors. So how do we put all of this into action? What do we do? 100% of our efforts complement monitoring efforts from the DOH, or the Department of Health. And for those of you who don't know, one of the major jobs of the Department of Health is to monitor water quality, but it's a huge effort to get all of the water quality for the coastal waters. So by having a organization like Kuioka Viola, we can add capacity and create a clearer picture of what water quality actually looks like. Interestingly, at the beginning of Kuioka Viola, it was a big question of, can an average person come in, go through rigorous training, and learn how to monitor water quality to the rigorous extent that DOH folks can as well? And after 3 years, the answer is a huge yes. It has been a big process working in collaboration with the Department of Health, creating what we call a Quality Assurance Project Plan, or a QAP, if you ever hear that word, which helps us to replicate all of DOH's procedures so that our data is just as quality assured as the Department of Health's. We sample 13 parameters, which Kim is going to dive into a little more in our technical section, at 39 sample sites. All the way up north is Honolulu Bay, all the way down to Āhihi-Kīnau Natural Area Reserve. And all of our data is publicly available, and that's raw data in the form of a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. So all of this data can be downloaded from huiokaviola.com. It's found in other areas as well, but that's the easiest to access. And then we just recently came out with a coastal water quality report that crunches the data from 2016 to 2018 for both West Maui and South Maui. And we're really excited. We just finished that last week, so there's a couple hard copies on the table when you walk in, but that can also be found on our website. So that was our overview. Kim is going to dive into more technical details.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming tonight. So when we go out to sample, and when the volunteers go out to sample, we're sampling in knee-deep coastal waters. We're not sampling in streams, but we're sampling our coastal waters of Hawaii. And there's a lot of reasons for this, but the main thing is that we want to be able to match and see exactly, match our data to what the Department of Health is doing, just like Alana said. So that's why we're sampling in knee-deep water. We also sample in knee-deep water because it's a safe place for us to be and to be able to collect a bucket sample and to come back to our cars. So the picture on the right here is how we sample in the car after we've taken a bucket sample, and this picture on the left is us sampling in the knee-deep waters. So in order to make this project work, she mentioned the QAP. What an awful word. I've had to say this word for way longer than anyone should ever have to talk about a QAP. A quality assurance project plan is basically just a document that outlines how we are going to ensure that our sampling techniques are a good match and that our data is going to be of the highest possible standard. And the way we do this is through calibration procedures, making sure our equipment is up to date. You do it through verification by making sure that it's good before you go out and after you go out. We do it through duplicate samples, and so making sure that when we take a sample and we do splits and maybe say, is this sample the same as that sample? And then we make sure also by making that our procedures are in line. So those are some of the steps that we're doing on a daily basis when we go out and sample to try to make sure that the data is up to speed. The picture on the right is our lovely volunteer working in our lab at Lahaina Luna High School. So we have satellite labs both here at the sanctuary and at Lahaina Luna High School. And the reason for that is because the parameters are going to be divided, and I'll get into this in a second, into stuff that you can go and put your sensors in a bucket of water and figure it out right away what the answer is, and stuff that you have to send to an outside lab. And so when we send stuff to an outside lab, we have to be able to prep that and have the ability to kind of work with the samples in our satellite labs and calibrate our equipment and have a place to do all of that. So we have a bit of lab work involved in that here on Maui. And then our samples get sent off to Oahu to the S labs. And that lab can run kind of more advanced analyses. So the core of this program is trained volunteers, and the core of our quality assurance procedures is also trained volunteers. We have to make sure that everybody's doing the same thing every time. So all of our volunteers go through a training protocol, which includes some mentorship at the beginning. You get to come out and see what people are doing, through some classroom work where you get to actually learn about what's going on, some hands-on work where you get to actually touch the instruments, and then a follow-up period where you get to practice in the field again. So all in all, we're making sure that our volunteers are really, really working to collect the best possible data. What do we test for? We test for those bucket samples, things that you can actually test in the field from your car using instruments. We use a Hawk instrument, which is just a certain brand of instrument to be able to test these parameters. So we test for pH, which can be an indicator of ocean acidity, but can also vary with time of day based on whether the sample is freshwater or groundwater, but can help us tell the acidity of the water. We test for dissolved oxygen, and dissolved oxygen is a good indicator for water quality because it tells us how much microalgae might be in the water, how much the microalgae are using oxygen at any given time. We test for temperature, which given the warming temperatures in Hawaii, and it's been a particularly hot week, we can start to see trends in water temperature over time. And salinity, which helps us look at groundwater influences. A lot of the water quality problems that we're having at the coast come in both through the groundwater and through surface water, right? Through stormwater that goes over, but there's the unseen water connectivity through the groundwater system all the time. And lastly, turbidity. So that's what everybody really knows. How clear is the water? If the water doesn't look clear, then a turbidity can get elevated, and that's not good for corals, it's not good for fish. It doesn't allow coral larvae to settle out if the water has too much sediment in it, and it doesn't allow for corals to really grow to their fullest potential. So then the samples that we end up sending back to the lab include sampling for nutrients. And so we sample for nitrogen parameters, phosphorus parameters, and also we get a bonus parameter when we do this analysis, silicate. And silicate is an indicator of groundwater. So the nitrogen parameters, nitrate is the one that can be taken up the fastest by microalgae in the water. But if you have high nitrate, you can also have problems where you have bacteria in the water that can make the corals sick because they can't slough it off too fast. You have ammonia, which might be an indicator of wastewater, depending on the analysis, if we can get it done in time. And we have total nitrogen, which includes all of the nitrogen. So stuff that's breaking down in the water column, so say you have algae that's degrading or something like that, it would include those organic nitrogen in addition to the inorganic nitrogen. And then the silicate, like I say, is a signature that the groundwater is heavy in that area. So coming soon, we do intend to start sampling for Enterococcus. So a lot of people are like, well, okay, so there's water quality things that make corals sick and make ecosystems sick, but then there's also water quality parameters that make people sick. And so it's not really easy to test for a lot of the bacterial parameters that might directly affect humans. So we use an indicator. And one of those indicators is this Enterococcus, which can survive in marine waters. And that's what the Department of Health and the EPA approve. And they're working on the second indicator called Clostridium, and that's just a separate bacteria, and I don't think the Hui will be able to be doing that right away because it requires some advanced procedures. But if we did get really high Enterococcus, we might ask the Department of Health to come in and test for Clostridium at the same time. Either way, both of these are not ideal. They're not the perfect indicators. Because they're just sort of a representation, there could be some problems with Enterococcus data. And so we're still looking and working with different groups to try to figure out the best way to measure bacterial loads in the coastal waters. And so then what are we not measuring for? We're not measuring for heavy metals, radiation, pesticides, sunscreen chemicals, and pharmaceuticals. And the reason is this is because it's costly, hard to detect, might need special sampling equipment, might need special analysis procedures, and require, in general, so how do we deal with this, right? It's not like we're saying that none of these things could have an effect on the reef. That's certainly true. It's not like it's being entirely ignored. But we are instead looking for partners with academic organizations and other professionals that can analyze for these sorts of things in a better way. So it's about creating partnerships that might last to help us to get to answer some of the things when we think these particular parameters might be a problem. And now I will get to hand over the mic to you guys.
So I'm James Strickland. I'm the project manager for Hui-o-ka-Waiʻola, and I'm going to be talking about the results, or some of the results that we found. But before I do want to just quickly go to the website, just so everyone, so this is just huiokawaiʻola.com, and if you want to get our annual report that talks about our data, you can just download it right there. Or if you want to look at the data yourself, we'll just click on data. And then you can download yourself, you can look at the raw data if you're interested. And I'm not going to be going over the raw data, just an interpretation of it. But yeah, it's all on the website. But yeah, check out our website. It's pretty user-friendly. So we're mainly going to be talking about South Maui, but just for completeness, we'll just mention West Maui. So West Maui find that, yeah, there are high nutrient levels, but every site we test at, so in West Maui we test 19 sites. Every site we test at does have higher turbidity than what the Department of Health says it should have. So the Department of Health has these state standards that they developed, and for turbidity, every single site that we test at has higher turbidity. And Kim mentioned it, turbidity is the measurement of the water clarity. Think of it, it's like in air, it's like smoke in the air. Or it could be fog, or it could be just anything that impedes the clarity. Now the problem with turbidity, so you just have all these things floating around, and then sunlight. Sunlight can't get through it, can't get down to the coral, and the coral needs sunlight to eat. So then that affects the coral badly. But then also turbidity will settle on the coral. Well, the coral wants to be clean, it doesn't want to be dirty. So then it has to use energy to clean itself, which takes away, which is just a stressor for the coral. Yeah, so that's the primary thing. Oh, so also, does anyone have an idea why turbidity levels would be so high? Yeah, so West Maui has a lot of perennial streams. Perennial streams, it just means that they're flowing year-round. But then there's also a lot of streams that will pick up whenever there's a high rain event. So you have all that soil coming down and going right into the water. So now, South Maui. So South Maui does have high turbidity in a lot of the sites we test at. We test at 20, so we have 20 sites in South Maui that we're routinely monitoring. But the big problem there, or one of the problems, is high nutrient levels. So nutrient can come from agricultural runoff, or it could also come from sewage. It just doesn't sound good. So yeah, so high nutrient levels. So keep in mind that we have had, we've had 100 years of big pineapple and big sugarcane production. So even though that's not going on anymore, well, there's still effects. There's still fertilizers in the ground. So whenever there's big rain events, you know, they're coming down. But then also they're seeping in from just submarine discharge from things that are just already in the ground and just find their way out to the water. So there's lots of reasons why you could have high nutrient levels. And then also, Kim touched on this too, the problem, what's the problem with high nutrient levels?
Algae.
Yeah, algae. So it could lead to an algae bloom, and the problem with the algae bloom, sort of like high turbidity, but the algae completely cover the surface of the water. And the problem with that, the sunlight can't get through, so everything under the algae ends up dying. So now we're going to just show some graphs on the sites that we test at. And we just have them split up. So this is our North Kīhei team, and that's the name of the group of volunteers that go out and test these sites. You're North Kīhei? Hey! Okay, so let's spend some time on this graph and figure out what it means. So you have, so on the x-axis, the horizontal axis, it's the name of the site that we test at. The first one is Haycraft Park. But what's going up and down, the vertical axis or the y-axis, is how many times it is the state standard. So Haycraft, so you have sort of the darker green brown color. The darker green brown color is the turbidity, and then the lighter green is the nitrates. So for Haycraft, for the turbidity, it's about 25 times the state standard. So that means the state has a standard saying, hey, the turbidity should not exceed this point, while Haycraft is exceeding it by 25 times. So we're going to be using this graph for the next 3 or 4 slides, but just to describe our, just how impaired our beaches are. So and then for Haycraft, it looks like it's about 27 times the nitrate level. So does anything stand out here? Yeah, so look at Cove Park. So out of every site we test in West Maui and South Maui, Cove Park is the most impaired. Cove Park has about 105 times. So the state says, the Department of Health says, nitrate levels should not exceed this amount, while at Cove Park, it exceeds it by 105 times. So now, so these sites, so they're still really impaired, but just so we have the same scale, Cove Park sort of messes up all the graphs. Then we'll move on, and this will be our last one. So every single site exceeds the state standard. And then this is a graph. So this is just geographically where the sites are.
Did you test the 3 cans?
And now I think Tova's up.
So I am going to be talking about what are our next steps that we're taking now that we have this understanding for the water quality issues. So what do we support? Well, we support clean water. And what does that mean? It means any number of things. It means we want to deal with the sediment coming out. We'd like to see cesspools removed, improvements to the wastewater treatment plant. But in order for us to really say which of those we want to do, I mean, there's a very broad suite of actions you need to take when addressing water quality. We need to take our next step of testing to do additional work to figure out what has to be done. So you can see, because we're just testing for some basic physical parameters, it doesn't necessarily spell out what the source of the pollution is for each of those areas. Both James and Kim mentioned the nitrates can indicate various things. They can indicate fertilizer, but they can also indicate a wastewater signature. So you've got to figure out, with additional testing, going upstream, where that comes from and how to parse out what the problems are. So it might seem like we're not at the punchline of what matters yet with our data, because of course we all want to know what's that from. Of course, that's the question that we're all asking. But you can't manage anything until you've measured it. So where we were starting from was 0 baseline data for the coast. So we didn't even know, other than visually, you can see the turbidity, you can't see the nutrients. We didn't know where we were. So that first step is establishing the baseline. And the next is to figure out, okay, with that, who do we need to partner with? How do we need to fundraise? And what other tests do we need to do so we can get at that source where it's not obvious? Sometimes it's obvious. And we're not wanting this data to just sit in a website or sit on a shelf somewhere. The point here is that it's informing decision making. So it's fantastic that we've got representation here from the county. Thanks for coming, Kelly. And the hope is that not only all of the people who are involved in Hui o ka Waiʻola, but the rest of the broader community who now knows, and that includes you, that this data exists, make sure it gets brought up when you're in a room where a decision is being made, and understanding what's happening with our coastal waters would help lead us to better decision making, or making sure that we're thinking about more of the problem in a holistic way. We do, of course, want to get to action. It's not that we don't want to see action, but we have our focus as Hui o ka Waiʻola on the testing piece. So it's about finding those community groups who can work on those actions on the land that need to take place, or policy, or whatever the solution is that we decide is necessary for that source of pollution that we're seeing at the coastal level. So there are lots of groups that are focused on that way. Perhaps you are representing some of them, and you're working in parts of the island that we haven't connected with. But we are definitely wanting to foster those relationships and figure out how we can enable the actions being taken, because it's going to take an army of many to actually address the issues that we're seeing coming up. While it's wonderful to have the distinction of the very first group in the state of Hawaii as citizen scientists to be doing water quality monitoring, we don't want to be the only one. The hope is that this can be replicated on other islands so that all over the state we're moving together and beyond. So Kim is doing a lot of work to bring the program to other places, and our group has hosted a series of webinars and presentations to groups who might be interested in getting it off the ground. All the information that's needed to do this is shared, it's available through the website, and we're happy to foster that. So again, if you're connected with an entity that you feel like needs to get on board with this, be in touch, because that is one of our goals and a step we have to take. As Alana mentioned in the beginning, our next step will always be fundraising, because although we do work through the kindness of our many volunteers who are there, we also find that some roles have to be staffed and some roles have to be stipend in order to make sure that we have that quality in the way that the work is being rolled out and checked through. So it's about $4,000 a site. Adopt a beach is a great idea if you've got a place you love going with your friends. Maybe pitch in. There's a number of ways that you can do this, and there'll be a table that Amy's going to be housing at the back to help figure it out. But we have had tremendous support so far in getting this program going. But because the whole meaning of having baseline data means that you are continuing to do that data set over the long run, it means that support also has to be there to do that data set over the long run. We're not really getting there. So you've learned from Alana that we're doing this because we love the ocean, we love the islands, we have a community of people involved in various roles that allow us to actually have this functioning at a very high level, which, as Kim explained, is approved by the Department of Health. We've got great instrumentation that's calibrated and fantastic team leads that make it all happen. You learned a bit about all the different tests that are taking place with each sampling. James ran us through what our hot spots are, just a high level for a few parameters where we're seeing there's issues in South Maui. I'll plug the data table. Come on back if you want to dig in a little more to that. And what this gives us all is we collectively have a better understanding of what's going on in our coastal waters. And as such, we can now all work together to take those next steps to improve coastal water quality together. So that's all for me. I will turn it over to questions, which will be moderated by Larry.
First of all, can I just ask everybody who has had any part in this program as a volunteer, as a supporter, please stand up and let's give them a hand, because look what they've done. This is amazing. Wow. So as you can see, this is just the first part. We've got a long way to go, but we've got traction, we've got momentum, and we've got some super smart people here to make this happen. All right, let's take questions. Daniel.
So the Department of Health Clean Water Branch is tasked with testing the water quality. My question is, how many on-the-ground water quality testers do they have on Maui? And because this is baseline, that means very little data has been collected over the years. And it seems to indicate the data you collected seems to indicate that we have impaired water in South Maui. Why isn't the Department of Health funding more testing rather than, I mean, we're paying for it anyway, right? We're taxpayers. One way or another, we'll pay for it. Why are we paying the money and not the state to do more testing, since apparently there seems to be a problem with our water quality?
So I think you answered part of that.
Hi, this is a good question. So the program that the Department of Health uses to fund this is called From the Beach Act, which is EPA funded. And so the funding for that program is always changing, and so they have limited budget, which is why they only have one water quality sampler on Maui. There's one on the Big Island. I think there might be two on Oahu, and they're funding their sites based on there's a tiered system for which site gets sampled, right? And it's related to whether that is a priority beach specifically for human use. And so they're doing enterococcus testing at many of their what they call tier 1 sites. And so that was that bacterial analysis that I mentioned. But this nutrient analysis and this additional parameters that we're adding in that specifically relates to our ecosystem is kind of that next level for the DOH. And so they really don't have the ability, the funding through the state to do that. And so that's where we've come in saying, hey, the ecosystem matters, that kind of indicator matters. So there is baseline enterococcus data for some of these sites. We try to overlay the sites both from a quality assurance perspective, but also because we want to make sure that the data can go both ways. And maybe Joyla has more. Yeah, maybe you want to talk about the county. Who wants to talk about the county?
One mic. So we have been super fortunate that the County of Maui, through the Office of Economic Development and through provisos that Kelly King has provided for the South Maui lab, that the county has been funding this program since it started forever, and significantly a large chunk of the funding. And they continue to, year over year, add to the program. So the county is stepping up and recognizing that this is important and helping to support the efforts that the DOH, the state, can do the best that they can. And so the county has been wonderful to us. And so we always want to throw that in there. People are like, oh, why isn't the county? Oh, they are. They definitely are a lot. And so we're really grateful to them. That is through the Mayor's Office of Economic Development. A lot of the money is routed through and through provisos that council members make directly for us. So we definitely want to mahalo them.
I believe they test weekly.
Up to weekly at their priority sites.
And it's also true that as a result, I think, as a result of the existence of this program, the state has expanded the number of sites that they now test. So they added 9 sites last year, and that allowed us to go down from 48 sites to 39 sites. So that's I think, an indirect benefit of this program, but it's really, hopefully that will be a sign of things to come, that they can continue to expand what they do. And then we can move on to more interesting questions of where's this coming from and how do we fix it? Because they're just a monitoring program.
Kind of 2 questions. The first one is, I get these alerts from someone saying, so-and-so department says this beach is closed because of contamination, and then you come back a day later say it's all clear. Is that the Department of Health sending that out? Is it one tester?
That's the Department of Health.
Yes.
Okay. Second question. Those of us that swim a lot, almost every day, can we safely assume that if we're out farther, we're not in so much nutrients, or we're just swimming in it all the time?
We don't test out there. We don't know.
Nobody knows?
If we tested out there, we'd tell you, but we don't. We're knee-deep waters.
Can anybody make an assumption on that?
No. One thing you learn when you do science is you don't guess. You know or you don't know.
The thing I can say is the Department of Health is trying to answer this question, and they funded a project on Oahu to compare inshore versus offshore waters. So waters less, but their inshore and offshore is defined as less than 30 meters and more than 30 meters. So depending on how quick of a drop off, that could be depth. So that's how they define it, to try to see how far offshore versus inshore water quality compare.
Inshore is 30 meters out.
Yeah, and so this is where they defined it, and the EPA asked them to do that because, as you saw, we're exceeding the water quality standards everywhere, right? That might indicate also that the standards need to be looked at for different water depths, and so they're interested in answering that question. So that work will be done this summer, and the results probably available sometime early next year.
Can you make assumptions on the health of the water further out by the health of the reef? Because, as a snorkeler, I notice when I go further out, I can find living reef and more fish, and maybe it's over the last 40 years, it's gotten increasingly horrible next to the shore, and then you have to go further out to see the actual healthy reef.
In the 1970s, the Department of Health has a document that says, hey, we should use coral as a bioindicator for whether there's a water quality impactor. It just hasn't been, the way the system is set up right now, it uses the water quality indicator first. So I think that might be an interesting way to look at it.
When the first South Maui water testing training was done almost 2 summers ago, the information we were given was that near the treatment plants in South Kīhei and Lahaina, the nutrient level exceeded the Clean Water Act standards by 9 times. How does, in this chart you showed with Cove Park being 100 times more nutrient than the state standard, how does that correlate with the Clean Water Act standards, or?
Sorry, I think the best we can say is that the water quality is, that is a very high amount of nitrogen to be in that particular site. And so, yes.
Does that correlate with Lahaina wastewater treatment plant as well, nearby?
So the treatment processes at the Lahaina versus Kīhei plant are slightly different, and so the amount of nitrogen that's removed is also different. There is not a 100 and whatever it was, 103 time exceedance of the state standard on the west side, because it's different here. So when we talk about the need for additional testing, this is the type of additional testing we need to do. And actually, James, we're going out on Monday, aren't we? To get some algae from the areas, the 5 sites in South Maui where we have the most, the highest levels. We're going to do nitrogen isotope testing with a lab in Hilo that will then tell us the flavor, for lack of a better way to put it, of the nitrogen. So sometimes you get a very clear indication that's coming from wastewater. Sometimes you get a clear indicator it's coming from fertilizer. Sometimes it's not clear at all. It's just somewhere in between the two. But this is exactly the kind of thing. If we were to look back at the literature and studies that were done, what was that last? Was that 97, the last one? They did make a correlation between the location of the injection well, and it looked like that was probably likely. But land use has changed in the meantime, so we don't want to rely on data from back then. We want to start dip our feet in and doing a test to see whether or not we can establish that relationship.
Plan is possibly doing a better job in removing nutrients than the South Maui?
Yes, but it's because there's denitrifying bacteria that's actually in the channel on its way out to the seeps that come out of the nursery water.
And my other question was, I've heard that nutrient level pollution near the Kahului plant at Kanaha is 24 times, almost 3 times higher nutrient pollution than Kīhei or Lahaina. And, I've offered to help testing on that, and I guess that's another, should we be testing the North Shore as well?
It's great to test in the areas that need it, but it's even more important that we build a sustainable program that is staffed and trained and growing at a rate that we can manage so that we know we're keeping all the trains on time. So it's great to have suggestions from the community that areas people are interested in doing. We have a kind of work plan, a strategic plan for the next 3 years of what we feel like we have the capacity to roll out. And it's not going to put us there quite in that time frame.
One question I had before is I asked, well, what if we did a series of tests, at Kanaha, and what I was told was, well, just a few samples isn't scientifically good enough. So what is the baseline of enough testing for a scientist to say, hey, this means something?
I'll fall back on the Department of Health's answer, which is to have 30 samples over 2 years taken. So
That's enough?
that is considered enough if the samples are the average of those samples is above their standards, then it officially is considered impaired using the state standard. Statistically, you might be able to use less, but that's the number that they're using. So there's wastewater treatment plants and there's water treatment plants, and they're different. So one is treating sewage and one is treating wastewater. And then there's also the category of on-site disposal systems, which have been in the news a lot lately. So those are systems on your property that are treating waste on an individual property, and you're not hooked up to the sewage system. So each individual area might have its own, like say, a lot of Kīhei is going to the Kīhei sewage plant, and you can see where those lines are. There's some on the maps back there. But then say alaea has individual sewage treatment plants for some of each of the condo developments, right? So there's a number of them. So that's how that can go. Sorry, the bubbling. So submarine groundwater discharge. How many of you have heard this term before? Has anybody, have we heard this? Thank you. Sorry, submarine groundwater discharge. So especially on an arid coastline, most of the water that comes to the coast is coming out as submarine groundwater discharge, because there is no surface water, right? So all the water that's percolating through, and you can feel that when you go in the water and you can kind of see the colder layers, right? You're not making it up. You can actually see the waviness, and that's because the groundwater is coming up. So I would probably rely on this room to say it's really hard to tell whether the injection well is appearing as submarine groundwater discharge or as a bubbling. But there is a lot of groundwater coming through. I would say up to 90% probably of your coastline is coming out as groundwater.
I just want to add that the Kīhei wastewater treatment plant processes about 4 million gallons a day, and on average, they're injecting half of that into their injection wells. The other half is we used for irrigation, so we're at about 50% right now. And more, we inject more in the winter than we do in the summer because the irrigation demands are higher in the summer.
Anyone that checks cesspools and what's leaking from them, and what can we do about that? So I know what to answer this person. I've been cornered too many times.
No, there isn't a really good program for testing cesspools once they're in place. There should be maintenance procedures, but there generally aren't. As most of you know, cesspools have been phased out and you can't build them anymore. And they're hoping to phase out them entirely by 2050 is the state's goal, the legislative goal. Now, in order to phase out cesspools by 2050, that means that they have to have a plan. So this summer, they sent out a team of scientists to each and every island under what's called Act 125. They might come through here and give a presentation eventually. And Act 125 has them testing across all the coastal waters to look for evidence of cesspool contamination. And so they're working to try to figure out how to prioritize those areas right now based on both drinking water quality impairment and also coastal water quality impairment. But no, that's a great question, is how do you actually test your individual OSDS on-site system to see if it's actually leaking nitrogen? And if you have a tiny leach field, it probably is. I do have some pink dots on the map back there. There has been a survey. There's 100,000 of them in Hawaii. We beat every state except for New York in density. Long Island, if you come from Long Island's gross too. So, but the pink dots on the map back there haven't been validated. So that comes from the permits that were submitted to the wastewater division. This is, again, the Department of Health has a wastewater division, and when they submit the permits, that was collected by a single gentleman, and he put together this database of 100,000 points. However, that probably hasn't been updated. Some of them are from the 40s. Some of them are from forever ago. Who knows what's happened since? And who knows if there are extra cesspools? I know of places where there are extras. And so take the pink dots on the maps back there with a grain of salt, but there is mapping to see that, where the correlation is. So the clean water branch regulates this through our data has already been submitted to the Department of Health because we followed the QAP business, which I keep laughing about, right? That QAP means that we can submit to DOH, and every 2 years they put out what's called an integrated report, and within that, of the 537 watersheds in Hawaii, they determine which of those are considered impaired for which parameters. Now, where it goes from that's the next question. But that is the official process for figuring out what's called impairment.
Well, I mean, just to throw in a little shade of gray there, it depends whether it's point source or non-point source pollution. And the problem with a lot of what we're looking at is you can't just say, hey Bob, your hose is dumping junk in the water. It's more like, hey, the legacy use of these thousands of parcels of land have modified what's happening, and we now have sediment moving in a way it wasn't. And that's a lot harder to regulate. That's where the 319 program through Department of Health tries to fund both watershed management plans and the management actions cited in those plans as a way to try to comprehensively treat these pollution problems that aren't, it's not quite as simple as I wish they were to solve. It doesn't mean we give up and we don't look for those regulatory opportunities, but my time is dominated on the west side, and there we just have not had a lot of those available because it is this diffuse, non-point source type of pollution.
So now we know, to some extent, now we know what we've got to deal with. We don't know what the causes are, and that's kind of the question of the hour. We're trying to figure out a program that we can then work with partners all up and down the coastline to say, what is the problem in each area, and what do we do about it? One thing that's happening in South Maui, which has been 10 years or so in the making, is the Southwest Maui Watershed Management Plan. That process began in the aughts and didn't get to completion. It's now been rebooted, and there's now a proposal into the state for that plan to be accepted. And we think all the work is done, and we're waiting for the state to come back to us. Once we have that plan for Southwest Maui, this area, then we can begin working on mitigation measures with state funding. And we can begin to establish various specific standards for specific areas called TMDL, or Total Maximum Daily Load, which we can then use as a regulatory device. But we don't have the plan yet after a long, long wait. And so until we get it, we're kind of going to be continuing to do research and possibly beginning to do mitigation without the state funding, but the process has to get unstuck at the state level before we can really get momentum.